It's pros one, twos.
Hi, this is Brian Sebastian. You're watching and listening to Movie Reviews and More. We just finished interviewing Denny Tedesco, Randi, Hal Blaine. They played on some of the best music albums of
Now he's running the marathon.
all time. Here's our interview from the take a look. Tell me what you think. A friend of mine saw this. I was talking about it 2 weeks ago on the radio. I've been talking about this movie for 5 weeks. That's how good this movie is.
Oh, thank
I
you.
was there when the Funk Brothers. And I just finished my review on it. One of the best movies that I've seen in a long time. And there's a lot of rock documentaries coming out now. I just did Kansas 3 weeks ago.
I heard it's really good.
It's pretty good. Not as good as this. Not at all. But it's one of those things. As a percussionist, yes, we drummers bang harder, don't we? It's good to see something different coming out. Talk about the music rights, how tough that was.
Yeah.
And I know you've been working on it a long time. You've been having an honor with these guys because what you did is a great thing to have happen.
Sure. I mean, I started in '96 when my father, Tommy Tedesco, the guitar player, was passing away, and I knew I didn't have much time, so I quickly jumped into filming my dad and these guys. Dad passed away in '97. 98, we had this little 14-minute piece on VHS. Remember those little tapes?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I started trying to get people to look at this thing, and everything they kept saying was, "This is great, but you're never going to get this made. You have so much music involved." At the time, the belief was you're never going to get labels to agree to be with each other, let alone publishers. That was one problem, as well as the cost. And having a documentary. There's not many great, huge blockbuster documentaries, very few in the world. So to cover the cost of all this music would be almost impossible. So I kept going, hoping an angel would come through. Angel never came through. It's funny because when Standing in the Shadows came out in 2002, I panicked. I hadn't even cut. All I'd been doing at that point, 6 years, is just interviewing people. And a friend of mine at Discovery, where we were doing Discovery Films docs, he said, "Listen, how many Lion films do we have?" He says, "There's always another side of the story." So fortunately for me, I never looked at the Stay in the Shadows because I didn't want to know, and thank God, because it was so well done. That was an amazing thing. So I kept going, hoping. 2006 came, and at that point, we had started kind of introducing the idea of the film to publishers and labels. We had a lunch, we invited a bunch of people, showed the 14-minute piece, and kind of prepped them, kind of make friends. When 2008 came around, one time, one publisher gave me a quote, it would have made it a $2 million picture, just in music, because everybody's on Most Favored Nation. So if I have to pay this song $10,000, I got to pay everybody $10,000. So, and that lady came later when she saw the film, and she apologized. Not apologized. She said, "Listen, we get these requests all the time. You're the only one that's stuck it out." So I kept going, befriending people. Finally, we got to that point where I think everybody wanted to be part of it. But then the film came out in the festivals in 2008. We paid for that use, but you have to pay the use to release this thing. And the reality of, again, documentaries, music docs, it was not going to happen at the prices we had. So it was a publisher who said, "You need to come back, renegotiate with all of us, bring that price down." She wanted me to get tougher on her. She said, "You got a documentary, you're not going to get this out there if we don't get the price lower." So I brought the price lower, but still no one's biting. And that's when we decided to start doing donations. And we started, donation here, donation there, and before Kickstarter. And that's where it happened. That's how we did it.
I mean, it's amazing how long it took for this documentary to get to this point.
19 years now.
19 years.
Yeah.
Good.
19 years older and 30 pounds heavier.
I remember he only had one diamond in his ear.
What actually
Tuna.
Oh, they grow.
Yeah, I was just curious, from when you started it, how did the documentary or the form of it evolve for you while you were making it?
Well, it started, format-wise, I started shooting in film, 16 millimeter, because I wanted to be a filmmaker, and my wife, Susie, and myself, we had better, she's a commercial producer, so we had better access to film cameras, but we also liked the idea of film, But it kind of years later, then I started going to video out of necessity, and I realized, oh my God, much easier. Because now what I missed with film is I missed a lot of great interviews, because with film you got to have a whole film crew. But when we started cutting, I knew the beginning, I knew the middle, and I knew the end. But when we started cutting, the first 30 minutes of the film was cut. Another director-editor saw the 30 minutes and said, why are you cutting it like this? I said, what do you mean? He says, because I wasn't going to be part of this film at all. I was the director. And I didn't want to be, I wanted to keep myself out of it. He says, you're crazy not to be part of this, in a sense. You have access that none of us have. What you're cutting, any one of us have. We could do this. You should go the other way. And that's when I decided, okay, I'll try, and I introduced the film as myself, and this is the reason why I started the film. My dad's passing away, and I said, this is the story of my father and his extended family, the Wrecking Crew, and that's how I introduce all these guys.
Hal, I've always knew the names of everybody on the albums. I started as a disc jockey, so when I was playing these hits, for me in 1977, 78, I knew who you guys were. Never did I think I was going to ever meet you guys. So I always knew of you. I saw Buddy Rich, Louis Bellson, and then marching in the drum and bugle corps. Now we have keyboards and marching drum and bugle corps. So you got a bunch of kids looking up to you guys now, what you guys play. Talk about when you went on the Ed Sullivan show with that drum kit that Jerry was telling you about.
Well, that's the drum kit, really, as we called it, drum sets in those days. It kind of changed the drum world. It went from, a 4-piece or a 5-piece little set of drums or kit, and all of a sudden I wanted an octave of drums, and I started with the little one, bigger, and I had an octave, and that's the way I tuned them. I tuned them to the song of I Got Rhythm, boom, 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 boom. It was that simple. And now I could do, if you ever listen to the Carpenters records, you'll hear a lot of the kind of fills that I was doing on those drums. Because there was a little decay, natural decay, boom, 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 etc. Today you got electric drums, you could hit it and you go brrrr forever. But I loved the fact that it evolved into that little decay that created just a whole new sound. And within 6 months, every drum company in the world was putting out what Ludwig called it, the Octoplus, which was very nice. And Ludwig was always very nice to me. I didn't know about patents in those days. I never thought about patents. I never thought about patenting the ching ring that I came up with, the tambourine that goes on the hi-hat, all this kind of stuff. It's just natural. I wanted to get more sounds, and as a drummer, working with a trio, you wanted to have more stuff, so you could somehow play more. Instead of just sitting there with your brushes, now you had a tambourine going on 2 and 4. Now you had, instead of the great big shaker can, I used to use the little film can, put little glass beads in there, and you go right under the mic, and it came out perfectly, printed beautifully. So those things,
What you have to understand too is that he's not just a drummer, he's a musician, and he's hearing things, and he wants to make it more to make himself happy and induce the bands to listen to stuff like that. And because of him being so innovative, many other drummers would try and emulate that, and not very well, but at least they had something to look forward to. And he was very, very focused on making the drums much more important than what I ever thought they should be. I always said the drums should be in another room. Hide them out.
Solo piano. I always like solo piano.
But it's true. I mean, he took the time. He took the time to do things.
Well, I studied music for a long time and got a degree. In fact, I'm supposed to be getting a doctorate shortly from Berkeley, Boston. But,
You gotta take the
thank
test
you.
though, don't you? You still have to take a test.
Take a 10?
Test.
Yes,
You
Oh,
still have to
yes.
take a test. You know, they,
I'm laughing because we used to laugh about that. Take it, when do we
Take
get
a 10?
Take a
Take a
10,
test.
yeah.
Um,
Inspector.
what, you know, is I interviewed some of the guys like Mark Schulman, you know, one of the young drummers of today. And Mark said something, he says, listen, you could hate everything that Hal and Earl Palmer ever did, despite, or maybe never even heard their music, but you can't say you were an influence, because whoever you're influenced by was influenced by someone who was influenced by these guys, all these musicians. Because it was kind of like, you know, passed down. You know, when, I think it was Charlie Watts, who said what, he was so disappointed when he found out 10 of his greatest drummers were Hal Blaine. You know, very disappointed. You know, but it's that kind of thing, is because these guys did so many different things, you don't know you're copying the same person.
Charlie Watts came to my house. I was so excited. And the Stones came to my house one day, and after we had done the Tammy show,
Right?
and when Charlie shook hands with me, he was shaking like a leaf. I can't believe it.
I'm excited.
And I couldn't understand his name. He said, Charlie Watts. I said, what? I didn't understand what you're saying. Charlie Watts. And all these Stones. Nice to meet you, man.
And talk about, you were innovative too, the things that you came up with.
Well, you know,
Some of the most delicious potatoes you've ever had in your life. Remember that.
you got to remember, we come out of a jazz background, so we were used to improvising. I was anyway. Most of, I think, just about every one of us. Earl, Hal, Johnny Guerin, from the drum part, Larry Nectar, Leon Russell, Al DeLorean. They were terrific piano players, and there were chord sheets, and then we had a certain amount of freedom with that, because you put a chord down and they wanted to put some of you into their song. And in experimenting, going back and forth, fortunately I was able to come up with what a producer wanted or the artist wanted. But you never really knew, when we were talking about it earlier, on the sound of a different drum with the Stone Ponies. When I walked into the studio, there was a harpsichord. They're not an electric one, but the real harpsichord, because somebody knew that I could play it. I had never played it before on a date, and when it came time for me to play, there was no music. I had to make up a thing. Jimmy Bond was the arranger on that, and he said, "Baroque feeling." That's all he said. And when it came to that part, that solo in that record is the harpsichord solo I made up. I made it up from looking at the chords and just figuring how Bach would approach that. So it was something that you could look forward to in the record. And fortunately, Linda Ronstadt, we talked about it recently, because she's not singing anymore and she's touring with her book. And she was really proud of that whole thing and how that happened, you know. And there were many different times where there was like 3 and 4 piano players on it. Like for Phil Spector, there was always 3 or 4 pianos. It could either be Larry Nectar, Leon Russell, Mike Rubini, Al DeLorean, a friend of his by the name of Mike Spencer, and myself.
Mike Rubin.
And and then in the beginning, there was another guy, Gene Garth, who everybody forgets.
Oh, right.
Gene Garth was around too. And he did dates. He hated rock and roll, but he did them, you know.
Of course.
But it grew and grew and grew. And on many of the dates, there would be, if there wasn't just one, they'd have 2 piano players. Although I did a lot of dates also where there was just one. Axelrod, when you worked for Capitol, he preferred 1 piano player. But most everybody else would have 2, 3, 4, whatever they could do.
Is that because of less,
Les Paul?
no, I'm saying less because you're not going to be jumping, you're not going to be punching in with another sound? You know what I mean? Because nowadays, you could do 4 of those pianos yourself.
Sure. But no, you know,
Or do you
like,
think it was just a different player, he liked it that way?
most of the guys would use 1 or 2. Phil used 4. You know, Brian used to use 1 or 2, but mostly 1. And then another guy, like when we did Good Vibrations, there must have been 4 or 5 different piano players, at different points.
Right.
You know, filling in to do whatever they could. But you know, it's just it was a completely different time.
And that's where certain things where credit is given or not given because you didn't know sometimes if someone else came in after you or maybe before you.
Well, on Good Vibrations, it very could easily be, but everybody was playing different parts, or Brian would redo 8 bars.
Brian was also a bass player,
You know, and
aside from piano.
yeah. And I mean, there's a wonderful thing on YouTube of Brian and sitting down, and he says this is not right, and I said it's on God Only Knows. There's an organ part that's bop bop bop, those short notes, which I played, and when we originally did it, they were really long. It was like giving the full length of the note, and it was driving Brian crazy. And I just said, do it short, you know, and that was it.
Staccato.
That's the kind of thing, you know, and so it ended up. But
Piano speaking.
the best part about that was, you know, you have interplay between you and an artist, and an unbelievable genius of a producer, you know.
You know, there's one member, sorry to take over, there's one thing that I really like, Carol. You gotta talk about
Carol,
Carol.
who are you
Kate.
talking about?
Carol Kate is
Gotta talk about
an
it.
incredible guitarist. Most people didn't know that. She started out as a jazz guitarist and then went to the bass when she saw she could make a lot of money playing bass in the studios. And Ray Pullman, who was doing most of the stuff at that point, they needed other bass players, you know, and she jumped right into it.
You know, the thing about it, they never looked at Carol as a as a woman, because in those days when there's only one track, and when I say mono, that means basically you're not punching in, you got one time through. It was Glenn Campbell said, listen, everybody in that room could play. If you couldn't be in that room, you're not coming back, because you screw up, you're screwing up for all of us. So anybody like the bass and the drum, there was no weak links. So I give them all credit for, she was there for being a musician, not as someone's girlfriend. It wasn't like, nothing against percussion players, or, you know, where you could have a tambourine and, you know, and like Phil's stuff, you know, you were important to everything. So they just moved on, you know, through it.
I mean, Carol, I have to say, I mean, I was really impressed with Carol. She gave me a new respect for the bass guitar that I didn't really have before, because, I mean, you see her doing the bass line for These Boots Are Made for Walking.
No, that's Chuck Berghoff.
I'm sorry, but
She
yeah.
did not do it.
I apologize, yeah.
all right.
But just in general, though.
If you ask Carol, she'd probably tell you she did do it.
Oh, I'm sure she
We don't know.
But yeah, I mean, Carol.
You know, I think because she comes from a jazz background, they all come from jazz backgrounds, and I think being a bass player that and I could be wrong, but starting with guitar, you're looking at it differently, right? You're looking at bass as not, what's the word? You know what I mean? As a lead or something where you're feeling.
She can improvise.
Do you know what I mean? So I think that comes from a different background. That's why.
Yeah, it's just tremendous to watch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's very innovative, you know, and has a great ear. That works.
It does. It always helps. Yeah. And I mean, this documentary joins the company of, as you mentioned, In the Shadows of Motown,
Right.
and also 20 Feet from Stardom, looking at musicians and singers who have been in the background for a very long time and are now getting renewed attention. How do you feel about the renewed attention?
You know, I have to make mention right here about Barry Gordy was actually a neighbor of mine, a few houses up, because we used to laugh at the limo that used to pick up this little tiny child, take him to school every day. And eventually, there were people out there saying they did all the Motown records. And we knew that they didn't. We knew that we'd done a couple, 3 maybe, but there were some people who claimed they did all of them, which they'll be nameless at this point. Barry Gordy, not very long ago, did an interview and mentioned the fact that the very first hits came out of that garage. What's his name? Armin Steiner's garage. Up over his garage. He had a little studio. Then he became, 20th Century Fox, the head of music engineering. anyway, we did the first few little, I think we did Baby Love and a couple of things. And it's an amazing time. And I was shocked to hear Berry Gordy actually do this, not coming clean, but just to clear up the...
Well, Motown, you remember your first Motown day, what was it? See, Motown was here in '62. They were doing a lot of dates, you know.
They moved out here.
Yeah, they were doing stuff. And a lot of times if it was big orchestra stuff, you know, they were doing it here. So there was a lot of stuff back and forth. But to go back to the great thing about these docs that are coming out, I mean, it sounds like I'm jumping on their bandwagon, doesn't it? Like I'm 19 years old, and they're, you know, all these other docs. Thank God they came out. Thank God they laid the groundwork. Thank God they were successful. If those,
Which makes yours stand out even more, because I've seen them all.
yeah, well, I appreciate that. You know, and I'm so happy because there is always another story. You know, I tell people, there's so much information out there. Or, you know, you could interview your parents and you'll get a great story, and they should. There's so much knowledge out there, and I'm so glad that different cities, these different musicians. I'm lucky that I got them in their youth. You know, I say in their youth. Youth. You know what I mean? But I mean, if I had to do this documentary now, forget it. A lot of guys are gone. Memories, you know, are maybe not as, you know, sharp. Mine's not. You know, and I'm, you know, the kid.
I was honored to get 16 out of the 18 Funk Brothers at that point. You know what you both said? Is that this rock and roll fad is just a phase. We don't care about this music. You guys said that, and so didn't they.
Yeah.
That was really, really interesting.
Well, I have to disagree with that. I cared about it. I got the biggest kick out of turning the radio on and saying, Jesus, we played that hit record. I enjoyed that whole thing, you know, and I never approached it like I'm a jazz musician playing rock and roll. I never did that. I approached it as, this is my job, this is what I'm getting paid for, and I give it 100%, you know. I love to play jazz, but this is how I make my living, playing rock and roll. And then all of a sudden you start to see it. One date, and then you're doing 2 dates a day, then you do it 3, then you do it 20 a week. You know,
You're buying homes and
you know,
Rolls Royces.
you're buying Rolls Royces, you're buying boats, you know. And it would have never happened from playing bebop. You know, bebop just never supported that. So way later, you know, when you could be a jazz musician, and then you got a little more respect for being a jazz musician.
It's funny because my father said, listen, there's music and there's the music business. He says, sometimes they mix. He says, if I go to work, I play for Smiles. If the guy's smiling, I'm doing my job. I might think what I'm playing is better than what he wants, but it doesn't matter. He's paying the bill. So I gotta play what he wants. I think it's a piece of crap. But that's fine. It doesn't matter. I still gotta play what he wants, and I gotta pretend like it's great, even though he might not feel it's the best thing to play.
It's attitude.
It's all attitude. It's no different than what you're doing and you're doing today. We're gonna write that story. You know what? I think this is a better. You know, you do what you have to do to make it the best.
You know, Tommy said it best. He said, when we make a hit, it's fantastic. If it's not a hit, they don't say, we want our money back.
Yeah.
They still paid us.
Yeah, you know.
So you're a working guy, and I've said that so many times, it's no different than being in a factory and putting the door on a refrigerator. You know, you're putting a door on hundreds of refrigerators.
But
not all hits.
sometimes they're $5,000 refrigerator, or sometimes
Right.
they're a $300 refrigerator.
Exactly.
And let me tell you something too. When we all went into a Musicians Hall of Fame in Nashville. When I say we all, the Funk Brothers were there, the Wrecking Crew was there, and I think some of the Memphis guys, bands, we all went in at the same time. And I sat with a member of the Funk Brothers, and they had me crying because there were no contracts,
Yeah.
and they don't get the residuals.
Really
You know,
a shame.
and these guys are old, and they don't have that. You know, when they could really use that money. You know, finally, the Shadows paid them a little bit, but nothing like what they should be getting. I mean, those guys worked their butts off for Berry, you know, and when they first came out, the first date I did for them, they went to pay us with cash. I said, wait a second, we don't do these. Well, that's the way we do it in Detroit. We pay cash. No, you got to have a union contract. And we started. What was the guy's name? Hal Davis. And
That's right.
That was the guy,
The old cripple guy, yeah.
representing Motown. And what's his name? The bass player came
James.
out. James Jamerson
James
was
Jamerson, the greatest.
James is out, and we're playing, and we finish the tune, and they start, and I stop, and all of a sudden these two big black arms come around me like this. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And that's all he kept saying. And I turned around, it was James, you know. Finally, he knew that it was going to go on a goddamn contract, and that he knew that he could get residuals from it.